Hi guys, so it's been a while since I actually put out a video. I kind of broke my routine. I usually like doing at least one video per week, but I was a little caught up with work, so I wasn't able to really get to it. So also, a couple of you have asked me if I am an artist full time or if I teach art full time. Actually, I'm neither of the two. I actually teach chemistry in high school full time, and I teach part time at a community college. So I'm really pressed for time, and I really love doing these tutorials and giving you guys as much tips as possible. So sometimes it's a little challenging finding the time to do that. However, I'm still pressing forward with working on the book. I'm still trying to meet the deadline I had in mind. I think I'm going to need you guys' support as far as, getting the printing done and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to spice up a nice Kickstarter program or project and, have some nice incentives, like have some original art, maybe a video or something like that. A couple of things that would make it really interesting and hopefully inspire you guys to, be a part of that. Well, all right, let's get back to it. Trying to make sure I maintain my routine. I'm going to be continuing with the urban sketching series and the anatomy series. So for the new year, I've actually have some new ideas popping up. So you're going to be seeing a lot more interesting videos. Okay, so you don't have to worry about that. I'm going to pick up on some of the series that I had already started but never really completed or added much video to in a while. So I'll be doing that as well. All right, so what I thought was useful to do in this video is I've done a couple videos on how to draw realistic texture. Now, I figured what I'll do in this video is I'm going to do a comparison of drawing realistic texture by comparing it with pen and ink, graphite, and charcoal. So I'm going to pretty much do what I did before, but now I'm going to show you how I would approach that using these different drawing media. Now, of course, the fundamental principle, as I said before, in drawing realistic texture is that, well, there are three key things. And as I mentioned before in other videos, one is that you have to have some consistent pattern that you're using, okay, that the viewer will identify as a texture. And two, you have to make sure that it follows the form. Okay, it follows a cross contour. And of course, the examples that I used were always like a simple block, because a block is really, I think a very simple shape. But the thing is, it gives you good practice and how to get the whole idea of varying the value and the treatment. Okay, so and so that's the pattern. Two, the cross contour of the form, and three, of course, the value pattern. So if light is coming from whatever direction, you have to make sure that the texture corresponds to the value. In other words, the texture should be light in areas that are light, should be have a deep value in areas that are deep, in shadow. All right. So now, as far as pen and ink and graphite and charcoal, there are some little differences that you'll notice, and this applies to anything you're drawing. Okay, whether it's like the scales of a snake or a fish, whether it's fur of an animal or hair or whatever the texture is, the same basic principles apply. Now, the difference is, however, when it comes to like with pen and ink, actually, let me just sketch out. So that's the charcoal block. All right. So here we have a block we're going to render in pen and ink. The middle one we're going to render with graphite, and this one we're going to render with charcoal. Now, are there any primary differences when I'm developing texture with either of these three media? Well, when it comes to pen and ink, see, a main difference is that you don't have the convenience of laying even tone as you do with these. So the disadvantage is that with pen and ink, you have to develop the value using strokes. You don't have even tone. However, with ink, you do have the advantage of being able to layer your marks. So in other words, I can put down a series of marks here and layer it and go over it and go over it without compromising the texture. As a matter of fact, the more I layer it, it may even make it more intense. However, with graphite or with charcoal, if you lay down a certain value and you lay down a texture, and if you keep doing it, what you will do is actually even out the texture. So what I generally do, and you'll see it, is what I do is I lay in the value pattern of the block, and then I go over it with another layer in which I put the texture, and then after that I won't really mess with it that much. With ink you can keep going over it, but with graphite or charcoal you'll find that it blends it out. It's almost like you're shading it away. So you have to make sure that you lay the value first and then go over it with a sharp point. And that's one thing that I use too. Like I use, see these different points? That's something that I do a lot, because the rounded point is good for like shading in. See that? The different points. This is good for shading, and this is good for making marks. So this is what I would use to lay in the texture, and this is what I would use to put in the shading. Now what I sometimes do is, say for example, you could use one pencil, of course. It's like you know, you can do pretty much everything with one pencil if you have enough practice. But for those who may find it more comfortable to use different grades of pen, because you know, when you have B's mean deeper in value. They're softer and deeper in value. So when you want to make really dark marks, you use B's. So that ranges from 1B, 2B, all the way to like 8 or 9B. And if you want to make something in the middle, you use like an HB. If you want to make really light lines, you use like an H. I generally try to avoid H's unless I'm doing like a technical drawing, because they tend to be so hard that if you're not careful, you can actually make almost like engravings. You know, you can actually disrupt the surface of the paper, and what will happen sometimes when you shade over it, it leaves white lines. So you have to be careful with that. All right, so first I'm going to do is what should I do first? All right, you know what, since most of the tutorials before that I did were in ink, let me do the charcoal and the graphite first. Now one thing I decided I was going to do is show you two ways you can use this, but I'm going to do one with graphite and one with charcoal. With this, some people just like shading like this and laying in their values with no smudging. Now other people, they like laying in values like this, and then they use like a paper stump or tortillon, something like this, and they actually smooth the values out. See that? So I'm going to do this with the charcoal, and with the graphite I'm just going to use the pencil only. All right, and you'll see how I'll create a texture. Now, as I said, we've established a form. Now the second thing we're going to do is we're going to establish the value pattern. We establish the value pattern by deciding on where the light is coming from. I'm going to assume the light is coming from the upper left. So what does that mean? That means that this is going to be lightest, this is going to be the middle value because it's facing this way, and this is going to be the deepest in value because it's facing away from that. All right, so what I'm going to do is, let's do it with the graphite. I'm going to make sure I use a HB, okay, and I'm going to really just shade in all the sides, but I'm going to shade them so that they correspond to the value. So this will pretty much be the lightest in value. All right, and I'm going over it. I'm not pressing hard at all. I'm being very, 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 very gentle. Okay, and this is a very good practice. I think you can make this as exercise to just give yourself some practice in creating. And as a matter of fact, I would advise that you do this. Like in my drawing classes, I have students do like 9 of these and create 9 different textures. And it gives you practice in learning how to create even tone. In other words, create an area of even value. Now, it's important to lay in, for me actually, I find that it works best, when you lay in the value before you put the texture over it. Why? Because if you put the texture over it, it may just look like a pattern. See? And then you have to focus more on trying to fill in the white spaces. But by doing this, you have the foundation which you can use and overlay this with whatever texture. Now, an important thing to note here is that notice I treated my outlines very lightly. And that's very important, because if you remember, something I mentioned in my previous tutorials on creating realistic texture is that it's important to break the contour when you're creating texture. Okay, so that pretty much does it for the graphite. And see, I'm just using one pencil here. This is an HB. It's the deep side. It's the middle value side. And this side is lightest in value. Okay. Let's go to the charcoal. So I'm going to make sure this is really light. And as a matter of fact, I may not even need to put my pencil here. I can just actually do this. I'll show you in a sec. I'm just going to even out the values. And this is called a paper stump. It's really just pulp. And now I can just use the whatever is on this and do this area. See, without having to put the pencil there, because the pencil may still make it too dark. So now I have my foundation, see? And on top of this, I can lay in the value. So if I want to do this for the ink, you know, I could maybe do something very light like this, as I have done in other videos. Now, of course, you know, in your drawing, you can do a variety of textures. You don't have to necessarily do the ones I'm doing. So let's say, all right, let's do a bumpy texture or something. So what I would do is, I'm going to make sure that when I'm doing the texture on this side, I use very light lines. See that? You can, this could be scales, this could be, you know, rocks, you know, this could be rock, you know, it could create a variety of texture in this way. Now, something I'm doing deliberately here that I didn't tell you is that if you notice, all these little, you know, shapes are being contained within the box, the contour of the box. See, I'm pressing harder because here is in shadow. See? See that? Now, see how everything fits within the contour? And look at the difference it's going to make when I start breaking it. You see that? And that's the basic principle. I can even go over this, but I would make sure I go over it again, because you always want the texture to be the last mark, so it's more pronounced. And here is where I can even switch to something a little bit bolder if I want to make the shadows or the texture in the shadow, you know, a lot stronger or bolder in value. See that? And there you go. And it's that simple. I can go in little crevices and, you know, deepen the shadows a little bit. See that? And there you go. Up here, I make sure I treat it very lightly. And that's the thing about creating realistic texture, is that you have to make sure that the shadow the texture conforms to light and shadow. So in other words, where it's receiving a lot of light will be light in value, and where it's not receiving light will be deep. See, I'm strengthening the contour down here because here is in shadow. See that? Now, with the graphite, same principle. What texture could we use? Let's make this wood. So I could even go over this. See, I'm gonna use a pattern here. I'm just making up something. Here the lines will be even lighter. And here I'm going to use really deep value. Now notice what I've done here. I have not disrupted the contour, and again, just like I did here, look at the difference it makes when I break the contour. Remember to keep it light, the light areas. Deep in the deep areas. See that? And this goes for creating the texture on anything that you're drawing. Okay, so likewise with the ink, you know, when I'm in this area, I'll try to make see what I'm doing. I'm breaking the contour. That does wonders for the texture. You know, and that's the basic idea. See, this is one of the things about working with charcoal that you have to be mindful of, because it can smudge easily, so you have to be careful. Sometimes you may need to go in with a sharp point and rework some of those textures. And you do the same thing if you're working with scale or any other type of texture. So this is something I think, you know, I thought it was useful for me to share with you guys. I think it's, you know, you should definitely give it a try. And as I said, try to create the same thing with as many different textures as possible, and also with as many basic shapes as possible. So you may want to try this with a cone. You know, you may want to try this with a sphere. You know, you may want to try this with an egg. You know, you may want to try this with you know, you may want to try this with a cylinder, of course, definitely. And do it with as many, and trust me, what this will do is it will give you enough practice to be able to deal with just about any type of form you could draw, just about anything, just by practicing this, whether it's with ink, with graphite, or with charcoal. And also remember that what I did with the charcoal in terms of evening out the values, you can do that with graphite as well, but I just did with them differently to show you that there are different ways you can approach it. All right, so hopefully you guys found something useful in this, and you know, you can apply it to your own drawings.